So please give a warm round of applause. Damon Anderson, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. But gosh, my heart is racing. And even more so because I have 2 heartbeats at the moment. So please bear with me if I'm a little bit breathless and just need to catch my breath. But I'm here to talk about Beyond the Happy Path. I want to start by asking you a question. How would you feel if you received any of these notifications? Great news, you're spending less. Hungry, grab your tasty deal today. You're winning, you've lost 5 pounds, keep going. And did you forget to log your period? Now, on the surface, you might be thinking, I would feel fine. If anything, these notifications are quite positive and quite encouraging. Well, actually, unless we understand people's reality and the context of why they're using our products and services, even just simple notifications like this can be quite harmful and quite damaging to people. No, it's not great news. I'm really struggling financially, so I have less money to spend. Stop telling me about your offers when I'm fasting. I can't eat right now. I don't want to lose weight. It's the opposite. I'm actually trying so hard not to. And no, I didn't forget to log my period, but thanks for reminding me that I'm struggling with my hormones. I'm here today to talk to you about these 3 words. Now, on the left, we have things like unhappy path and edge case. And as designers, researchers, developers, PMs, we say these words and we kind of roll our eyes. We say things like, it's only 1% of people, or it's not important, we won't do it right now. But on the right, we have delight. And as an industry, delight is put on a bit of a pedestal. Lots of businesses want to create experiences that are exciting, delightful, joyful, or anything that creates some kind of positive emotional connection between the user and the product, service, or brand. And that's generally because we believe that delight will help to increase things like conversion, retention, loyalty, and all of those lovely jargon buzzwords. But actually, I'm here to talk about how it's not just about delight, and how designing good experiences is so much more than that. In order to design good experiences, we need to understand where people are on their journey and meet them there. And that's not always delightful, and it doesn't need to be. We need to understand people's emotions, behaviors, and context across the whole experience. Now, the reason I'll say emotions, behaviors, and context is generally because, as people, what we do influences how we feel. So, as an example, when I'm practicing this talk in my hotel room, I feel fine. But suddenly, when I'm stood here and there's lots of eyeballs looking at me, I suddenly feel very, very nervous because my context has changed, which directly influences how I feel. But before I go any further, I just want to take a second to explain who I am, why I'm here, and why I care so much about unhappy paths. So hey, I'm Emily, founder of a design studio, Ampersand. And across my career so far, I've worked in some of these industries. I've worked in finance, gambling, health and social care, and in marketplaces. Now, you might think that they're very random, and some of them are completely opposite to each other, I know that. But there is 2 things that connects them all together, and that's risk and emotion. I've spent a very long time thinking about what can go wrong and how our products and services directly impact the people that we design for. And it's really shaped and framed how I think about design, which is what I'll share with you today. But the main reason I'm here, the main reason I'm standing on this stage, is because of my own experiences as a consumer of unhappy paths. So I'm going to share some of my stories with you. So, without further ado, meet Lynn and Roger. Now, you might be able to tell, hopefully, that I'm in this photo, and these are my grandparents. Now, unfortunately, a few years ago, my granddad sadly passed away, and it was a really, really difficult time for myself and my family. If you've ever been through anything like that, it's exhausting, it's draining, and we had to go through and cancel a bunch of his subscription services. So that meant things like closing accounts completely, or it meant things like changing usage from 2 accounts to 1, or changing things from my granddad's name into my grandma's name, and it was a lot. But every single time we cancelled, we got email after email after email saying things like this: "It's not goodbye, please come back, we want you to come back, we miss you." We even had one email that said, "Don't let your lazy self take over." Now, you might be thinking, it's just emails. Just delete them, it's just words. But I've never seen my grandma so upset and so angry before, and all I could think was, this is my industry. And I remember her saying to me, "I've just told them what's happened, why are they trying to make fun of me? He's not coming back." And in my mind, I was thinking, no one is making fun of you. You are just an offboarding, unhappy path that hasn't been considered or hasn't been prioritized because maybe you don't directly link to revenue. And in my brain, I was thinking, why couldn't there have been a drop-down, reason for leave deceased? And it could have made what was a really not great experience slightly less bad. And in that moment, we didn't need, I'm stepping ahead. So what happened? So it was 15 years of loyalty and trust was broken in some instances. My grandma had been a loyal customer to some businesses, and in those moments, she decided that she no longer wanted to be part of them, because although they had been a family to her, apparently, for the last 15 years, in those moments, she didn't feel seen, and she just thought, it's saying a lot about your brand in this moment. So, I'll try again. In that moment, we didn't need delight. What we needed was understanding, clarity, trust, and a human experience. Now, often when we're designing offboarding experiences, for example, we always assume that people cancel because they want to. Maybe they don't want to use the product anymore. Maybe they just change their mind. But actually, we need to remember that sometimes people cancel things because they have to. In our scenario, somebody passed away. Maybe they can't afford it anymore. Maybe their physical ability has changed and they can't use it anymore. What you do and how you design offboarding experiences is, like I said, what it says a lot about your brand in those moments, and we really need to consider it. Now, the next example I want to give is a little bit more personal, but something I think is really, really important to talk about. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm currently pregnant, which is very exciting and scary, but that whole journey is full of unhappy paths and full of emotion. So, if you haven't seen it before, this is what a female health tracker, period tracker, looks like. And along the top, you will see the calendar, and then that will show you where you are in your cycle. It will then use information about you to predict things like, when is your period due? When are you most fertile, for example? And all of those lovely things. Now, if you haven't been on the journey before of trying to conceive, it's a very difficult one. And the longer it goes on, every month that your period arrives, it becomes more anxiety-inducing. You start to think things like, why isn't this happening? Is this ever going to happen? What's wrong with me? And it becomes really difficult. So I came into the app one day to say, yep, unfortunately, it hasn't happened this month. And what was I met with? Did you know about pregnancy mode? Yes. Yes, I did. All I've been trying to do and wanting to do is swap to that mode. Now, again, you might be thinking, it's just a modal. Just dismiss it, just move on. But in those moments, it's one of the most emotional moments. Day one, it's very raw and filled with emotion. And to think about how they don't necessarily understand how people could be feeling. Yes, they're trying to nudge people to move to different features and functionality, but not necessarily having awareness of how people could be feeling is a huge impact. So what could they do instead? Well, firstly, really think about the timing and experience level. So for context, I was a user for on and off 4 years for various different reasons, and I was very, very well aware of all of the different settings and modes and things that they had. So when we're designing experiences, think about your first-time users versus your advanced users. And really think about the timing. So let's not just blindly trigger modals. Really think about when is the most appropriate time to surface information to people. you could also think about users' engagement. So there's a carousel which people can interact with and read more content. And you can probably make a pretty good guess that if they're interacting with that content, that they want to read information. So put it in there or something, and that way you can say, we are pretty confident that we're not going to cause any harm to people. Or trigger it based on their usage. So for example, if they log a positive pregnancy test, then use it and say, congratulations, now swap to this extra mode, which is also paid for, by the way, so hence why they want to try and encourage more people. And the last thing is to think about the impact of business goals. Now, I'm not in the company, but I can probably make a pretty good guess that they are siloed teams working on different things. And I'm imagining the pregnancy team has lots of goals around trying to encourage more people to swap to those modes. But by doing that, we're not necessarily thinking about the goals of the other team. So really think about, if we're trying to nudge people's behavior in one way to try and change something, think about the trade-offs that we're making, and is it the most appropriate solution? Now, I have one more example on this. So unfortunately, as part of my experience, I did have a miscarriage. And if some of you don't know what that means I was pregnant, and then I unfortunately wasn't anymore. So I went into the app to say, I am no longer pregnant. I did get to pregnancy mode. I'm no longer pregnant. From there, it asks you, what do you want to do? Do you want to log the end? Do you want to delete it, or do you want to keep it? Now, that's actually pretty good, because it's giving control back to users, and it's saying things like, we understand it's emotional, and we understand you might not want to keep that information. That's pretty good. But then after that, my goal was changed back to track cycle, which is a little bit odd, because actually I wanted to be on the get pregnant mode. So not a problem, so I clicked back onto that. And then what happened? Congratulations on taking the next step. Let's get ready to welcome your baby into the world. Okay, so then what happened? I deleted it straight away. A loyal user for 4 years. And again, you might be thinking, it's just emails, it's just a modal, it's just an onboarding journey. But in those moments, I was thinking, if you are intelligent enough to be able to predict when I am most fertile, you should really be intelligent enough to know that I'm probably feeling lots of raw feelings at the moment, and I don't need a big congratulations. And I think sometimes when we acknowledge that people set goals, we always assume that it's really exciting. We say things like, congratulations, there's confetti, it's yay, if you open a new bank account or whatever. But actually, can we give people control to maybe even ask them firstly, how are you feeling? And then we can tailor messaging and understand that journey a little bit more, rather than assuming that it's a really positive thing. So the next part is a lot lighter, don't worry. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do. So what we can do in our roles, in our day-to-day processes, to try and think a little bit more about the scenarios and situations that people might be in. So the first thing is we can ask, do we really know who we're designing for? Like, really? And it might sound obvious or trivial to say, because of course we should know who we're building experiences for. But a lot of the time, we don't. We make assumptions, or we design for the ideal user or the average user. And that's not great for anyone. So one thing that I love to do is use lenses. Now, I'm not trying to throw more jargon or frameworks out into the world. I know there's already lots of debate about personas, jobs to be done, behavioral archetypes, whatever. But this is something I found that's really helpful in the context of my work, and you might be able to find it helpful too. So, lenses. What lenses are is they kind of acknowledge that people are in different context states, and it helps you to think about those different levels of context. So let's imagine you are designing an app that allows people that cook at home to make recipes. So your user type are at-home cooks, and their jobs to be done is, I want to create recipes, something a lot better than that. But if you take a lens approach, what you can do for each user type is you can break it down into different types of context based on research to help you think about the different perspectives that people might be in. So you could go through the lens of experience level. So how could a learner or low confidence versus somebody that's advanced be using this? You can then start to pull out their needs, their pains, goals, and considerations. You could look through the lens, for this example, of social context. So the family cook versus the solo cook, and what might they need? You could look through the lens of emotional state. So maybe you have the midweek panic, or, I don't know, the chilled Sunday cooking or something. Or you can look through the lens of environment. So thinking about the physical context they are in. Maybe it's the tiny kitchen versus the well-equipped kitchen. And what you can start to see with lenses is there's real overlaps in the needs, which is great. So for example, you might have the family cook might also be in the context of the midweek panic. So when you're starting to scope features and ideate on things, you can start to say, well, how many different scenarios and contexts does this help for? And which ones are we not going for? So these are just some examples of lenses. I'd usually use about 6 per user type, because otherwise it becomes very overwhelming, particularly if you have many user types. And when we're thinking about things, it doesn't have to be big, sexy features. I think sometimes when we think about unhappy paths or inclusive design, we think that it has to be these really big, grand, blue sky things. But if I go back to the example of the cycle tracker, one thing that most of them do, which is actually very good, is you can go in and you can completely customize your notifications. So instead of saying, I want all notifications on, what you can do is you can go in and you can choose exactly which ones you want on and off. And that's good for a few reasons. So let's imagine you've gone into the period for a couple of days. From a lens perspective, it might be helping to cater for somebody who has an irregular cycle, or the forgetful one. You can also go in and customize the exact text that you want that notification to say as well. And again, from a lens perspective, it could be great for, if you think through emotional state, maybe somebody is an anxious tracker, maybe they are trying to conceive, or maybe they're very new on this journey. But it can also help through the lens of privacy. So I imagine if you're in school, the last thing you want is your phone saying, hey, your period's about to arrive. But you can write something that's maybe a code word or something. So it really helps through the lens of how could people who care about privacy. And the other thing you can do is you can set a time that you want the notification to arrive. So again, this could help from an environment perspective or privacy. So maybe you don't want the notification to arrive when you're at a certain place. Maybe you're in school, maybe you're in work. Maybe actually, again, through the lens of being forgetful, you want it to always arrive at 6 o'clock in the morning, so you know if you need to prepare or take anything with you. So you can start to see how, when you're scoping out or justifying different features, not only are you saying, this feature is helpful for people that want to track their cycle, it shows you all of the different contexts that it's helpful for, and helps you to consider where are we including, or where could we possibly be excluding different people. Or another example is from Strava. And if some of you don't know, Strava is an app that helps you to track and log running workouts and things like that. Now, before you publish your workout, you can change who can see your run. And your mind might automatically go to, okay, this is great for privacy. People that care about privacy will obviously want to choose who can see things. But you could also think about it from a motivation perspective or an emotional perspective. So people that feel compared against, or people that feel maybe they've had a bad workout and they don't want to be judged usually, they can choose to only show the run to themselves. And again, that becomes really important, because not only are you saying that you care about privacy, but you also acknowledge that sometimes people's motivation might change, and instead of them not logging the workout at all, they can keep it for just themselves. Well, the last example I want to give on this is these lockers. So this is in post, and it's very similar to lots of other lockers, like Amazon, for example. And you can see there's a little checkbox that says, I need a low compartment. Now, That's really helpful for a few different scenarios from a lens perspective. So firstly, it's really great for wheelchair users. So for example, people that can't reach a high compartment. But it's also good through the lens of, what if they have a really heavy parcel and they actually just can't lift it above their head? Or what if we need to consider different heights? So maybe somebody's a shorter person, or maybe somebody has a child and the child wants to lift it into the high compartment. So already, again, rather than saying we should build this feature because it's helpful for wheelchair users, by taking more of an inclusive design approach and showing that all the different contexts and scenarios it can be beneficial for can really help. Now, the other thing we need to do is consider if lenses are in tension with each other. So when I worked in social care, we had two different user types. We had care managers, and these were the people that were in the office, and they would be writing the plan of what the carers would deliver to the patient. And then we had the carers who were out in the field delivering the care. Now, when we started thinking about the different lenses that people might be in, we realized that some care managers are quite micromanagey, and they want to know every single piece of information that the carer is doing. But then when we looked through the lens of time for carers, we realized that there's actually lots of scenarios where carers just do not have time at all. And those two things were in direct conflict with each other. And if we'd only thought about the needs of care managers and the needs of carers, we would have never really realized that actually there's two completely conflicting contextual problems there. So from there, you can start to look at what's the trade-off we're making and what's the likelihood of that happening, for example. The other thing we can do is we can be consciously aware. So if there's one thing I would love you to take from today, it's just to ask, what could go wrong? What could go wrong when somebody is using this? Now, these next few slides are a little bit more focused on design. And I'm not saying that we need to design for every scenario and every situation. That's not what I'm saying. But what we need to do is we need to have conscious awareness of what could go wrong. And then from there, we can do extra research. We can assess the likelihood, the impact of it. But we need to have really made that conscious decision of how could we be negatively impacting people. So the first thing that I love to do is zoom out to the macro view. I think sometimes we get really, really focused on individual screens. But if you're creating any kind of map, whether it's a journey map, a service blueprint, whatever you want to call it, I love to create a risks row. And that is essentially a row that makes you pause, stop, and ask, what could go wrong here? From how are they using it? Where are they? Could they lose signal? Are they on a train? And it means when they lose signal, all of their work's going to go. But really zoom out from the individual screen and just think about what could go wrong. So an example I want to give is when I was in Thailand earlier this year, and I needed to order a taxi. So I ordered Grab. It's very similar to Uber. And I put in my location. I was on the little blue dot for them to come and pick me up. And I started getting messages from Grab basically saying, you need to make sure you're in the right place. There's a really hefty pickup charge, so you need to be exactly where you are. And I was thinking, okay, I am on the blue dot. I am ready. I am waiting. I know the car that's coming. And then shortly after, I started getting lots of messages in Thai that were very angry because I was not where I was supposed to be. Little did I know I was in a multi-story car park, and actually there was 8 floors. So I was in the right place, but on the wrong floor. And in those moments, there was no way for me to tell him where I was. How do you tell someone where you are when you can't speak the language? And translate just wasn't happening at all. But there was one thing that worked really, really well, and it was this camera icon. So when my verbal communication was gone, we relied on visual communication, and we sent pictures back and forth to say, am I going in the right direction? Where am I going? And I basically got lots of thumbs ups and thumbs down, which was very stressful, to be honest, but it helped. So by thinking about, rather than just, is the person going to arrive? Well, think about, Well, how do you help them if they're lost, but they think they are where they are, and they can't speak the language? So that was something that was really helpful. Big up to Grab. The other thing we can do is zoom into the micro view. So one thing I find really helpful is when I'm in Figma or your tool of choice, is I like to create these little component cards that essentially help me to document and think about the risk. So think about the risk theme. Is it usability? Could it be misunderstanding? What's the likelihood of it happening? What's the impact? And from there, you can start to see things like, where do we need more research? Or actually, it's not likely to happen, so we're going to leave it. I know that we all don't have time. We're all running around very busy and sometimes churning out screens. But if you can, take a break and go through and just look, are people going to misunderstand this icon? Are people going to misunderstand jargon, whatever it is? But really zoom in to the individual screen and try and think, what could go wrong? And we need to acknowledge our blind spots. So often, as humans, it's really natural to think about our own experiences and our own privileges. But we need to make room for voices outside of our own experiences, because journeys are often messier and way more diverse than we think. So if I go back to when I was in social care, we had a screen like this. Looks very basic, I know. But carers would basically go into the app and they would log the patient's mood. So we could track mood over time and see how they were getting on. And designers, we decided that actually we were going to change our brand and how we used icons. And we realized that actually the icons are quite big, probably don't need them that big, so let's try some new things. And it wasn't until we started doing some research that we actually realized that a very large number of carers really struggle or don't speak English and have very broken English. And actually, in these scenarios, they weren't reading the words at all. They were solely relying on the icons to be able to navigate. And it gave us a whole fresh perspective of how we used icons in the product. Not only was it nice from a visual perspective, it was actually things that people relied on to be able to understand how they were interacting and how they were navigating within the product. And that was really, really important for our own biases. And one thing that I think is super important is to not just rely on data. I think sometimes we all over-index a little bit on data. So let's say you're designing an appointment booking system, and it looks something hopefully a lot better than this. And patients can see when their appointment is and click reschedule if they need to change their appointment. Now, from a graph data perspective, you might say, well, 90% of people don't click it, therefore there's no problem. Only 10% of people click it. But what you might not realize is people are too anxious to click that button because they don't know what's happening next. They might panic, what if I lose my appointment and I can't get one for 4 more weeks? What's going to happen? Or maybe they then call up the practice, so it has a downstream impact. So really trying to question the why, and again, so the what can go wrong in our own processes is also really important. Now, the last section I want to talk about, just a tiny bit, is, if possible, to try and connect the user and the business impact. Now, I know not everything can be measured. I know that. But if you can, try and reframe some of unhappy paths to actually show that inclusive design and designing great experiences for everyone is good for the business too. So one of my favorite examples is Pinterest. It came out maybe 6 months ago, if you haven't seen it. If you go and search for an item of clothing, so say a black dress, for example, you can see this body types filter appears. If you click into that, you can then choose exactly what type of body you want to see when you're looking at different images. Great from an inclusive design perspective. You can feel better represented. You can also see how things might fit better on somebody that looks like you. So from a user impact perspective, you might say, well, if a user selects the body type they want to browse with, they will see images that better represent themselves, which means they are hopefully less likely to feel negative towards their own body. From a business perspective, you could say, well, if they enjoy seeing images, they will spend more time browsing, They will then get higher engagement from users who felt previously excluded, which means they will see more ads and we will get more revenue. I know it's not as easy as that sometimes, but instead of saying we should design a filter which enables people to feel more included, you could try and potentially ladder it up to some business goal to say, well, actually, if people feel more included, they will spend more time here and we'll get higher retention and things like that. Or if I go back to the Strava example, so with being able to click only you, if we went through the lens of motivation again, you could say if users have a bad workout, but we enable them to control what they share, even if it is just to themselves, instead of them deleting the app, falling off the bandwagon, we will then preserve the engagement and hopefully reduce churn in those low periods. So you're encouraging people to still continually use it. So again, instead of just saying it's good for privacy, you can start to say, well, actually, if we give people more control, more autonomy over their experience, then it is good for business too. So we've talked about a lot. Well, I've talked about a lot. But as a recap, so if we can, consider the different perspectives or lenses from different contexts. If you can, try and zoom out to consider the wider system, and zoom in to consider the micro view. Consider where we can give users control and autonomy, personalization. We need to acknowledge our blind spots and don't just rely on data. We need to always ask what can go wrong. And then from there, we can consider things like what's the risk, what's the impact, what's the likelihood, and what the trade-offs we're making. And if you can, if possible, try and connect to the user and the business impact. I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes. If you haven't read it, it's a book called Mismatch, and it's brilliant. But for better or worse, the people who design the touch points of our society determine who can participate and who's left out. Now that's all of us. Regardless of your role, we are all designing something that people interact with. And we all have a responsibility to think about how those things can impact people on the other side of our screen. So again, it's not just about delight. It's about making those bad moments less bad. It's about making those neutral moments better. And it's about making those good moments great. It's about designing for people, always. Danke. So thirsty.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. Wow, there's been so much. This is incredible. I think what's really important for me, I think also, is that when we're speaking about emotional state, it feels like this is sort of this inherent part of the inclusive design as well.
Yeah.
Right? And this is always sort of a story. It's always very difficult to argue about it and so on. But I think this is such a powerful way to explain it and explore it through the lens of lenses, I guess. So thank you so much for that. There were also a lot of questions that came in. One of them was from, let me just double check, from Nick. Nick is wondering, if tailoring messaging isn't possible, do you recommend neutral wording over more emotionally loaded messages? What is the best way to deal with the multitude of different situations users are in if you cannot collect any data about them?
Yes, that's a really great question. And so I previously used to work in a car marketplace where people would sell their cars to dealerships and things. And the company always assumed that it would be a really exciting experience. I think actually their motto was an exhilarating experience, that people should sell their cars. And it wasn't until we started thinking about it that actually people could be selling their cars for a multitude of reasons. Perhaps they've been in an accident, they can't drive anymore. Perhaps they're selling on behalf of somebody else. And until we could be confident about what scenario people were in, we opted for neutral language. Now, obviously, we got a little bit of pushback from the business because neutral language is boring, and it just is what it is. But we were actually saying that until we can design a bigger experience where we ask people potentially, why are you selling, and give them more control, then we decided it was just safer to use neutral. So if possible, I would say, obviously, it completely depends on your context, what you're designing, but the safer thing is to not assume, and then try and understand firstly, can you do any research, if possible, and try and uncover the emotional states that people are going through. But everywhere, if possible, give people the control to understand how might they be feeling about that whole experience, or what are their goals, what are they trying to do, and why.
Yeah. I think that even giving people the notion of being kind of, I guess, opting in when they would like to prefer to receive any kind of notifications or anything like that, I don't see it much, to be honest, but this is such a powerful way to really not just give people control, but also just better sense about when these things will emerge. Because, I mean, I don't know how many notifications you're receiving on a given day.
A lot.
It seems like I haven't used Uber Eats for 2 months.
Uber Eats is a bad one.
It feels like I have to do something every evening. It literally feels like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time in products or when we're designing services, there's this thought that we have to design products like it's your best friend. And we have to try and use really exciting, bubbly language. Everything is a celebration, but it's really not. And actually, for notifications itself, you can't control when the person is going to receive that and what they might be going through at all. So yeah, but Uber Eats is definitely a bit heavy-handed on the notifications.
Yeah. Yes. There was also one question that came up in Slack, I believe. Doing any kind of research in regulated industries can be very difficult because no access to users, strict NDAs, and so on. What would be your go-to research method in situations, especially when you work in these sort of industries?
Yeah.
How do you do research there?
Yeah, so it is difficult, and I have had difficulties before recruiting people in regulated industries. So there's a few different things I've done. I think sometimes B2B is sometimes a little bit easier than B2C because you've got people and account managers and things you can reach out to. But I've used things like recruitment agencies, and they help to source people. But I've also used things like forums and things before, because quite often people love to unload how they're feeling about certain things on Reddit and things. So you can kind of, even if you don't directly reach out to people, you can actually get a lot of information online about how people are feeling about certain things. Obviously, that's not as helpful when you're trying to get direct feedback about usability and whatnot. But it's really good as a starting point of what experiences and challenges might people be going through.
Mm-hmm. Also kind of desk research, right?
Yeah.
I think what I also try to do is to find people who are the closest to the audience, right? But then, of course, it's kind of like proxy, so it's not quite right.
Yeah, and also in we always think about, our direct research and competitors, but thinking about indirect ones, there's so many parallels between different industries that you can actually learn a lot more than you think you can.
Right. Sasha is wondering, how can we get more empathetic towards the multitudes of emotional states of our users without being too intrusive by asking all the questions about their personal state, information, and so on? How do you find that balance? And also, do you have any applicable processes that can be applied?
That is a lot more than 4 minutes that we've got time for. So yeah, absolutely, we'll come and talk about it afterwards. But I think sometimes, even if you try and reframe how we ask questions when you're doing research, is really important. So let's say, for example, you were doing an app for the gym, and you wanted to say, how many times a week do you go? You might say, 3 to 4, or 2 to 3, or whatever it is. But if you reframe it and say something like, tell me about the last month that you've been to the gym. Well, suddenly you start to hear things like, well, my child's been really sick, and I was ill, and I traveled for work, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And you can start to pick up on some of those emotional threads of the stories that people are trying to tell. I think the best thing is, if you're trying to uncover more empathy, is to really try and uncover those stories from people, and not just ask them point-blank questions, is to really dig into trying to uncover the emotion without them saying it directly.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I mean, there are quite a few questions that are coming in about how do you make a strong case, right? I think that this is partially something that you already mentioned, how to make a business case. But I think there is a desire, I guess, to justify working on an unhappy path for companies we're working for. So Raphael is writing, as companies usually profit in bulk, amount of transactions, unfortunately, and so on, they, in my experience, don't really care much for a few edge cases.
Yeah, so that's the thing. And I think quite a lot of the time, you feel like a bit of a pessimist when you're in work, because you say, what about this? This could go wrong. We're impacting people like this. And it's quite difficult to be that person in the room saying, we need to consider this, and it is. But it's kind of our role, to be honest, to be that voice, because the user can't be in the room, so we have to be that voice for them. So what I like to do is there'll always be balancing of scope, what we can do, what we can't do, timelines and things. But I think some of the times is when we say people don't care, and obviously it depends on your situation, is sometimes people actually aren't aware of the impact that it's having. So if you can do a little bit more legwork up front and say, well, actually, we could be doing this, which will have this impact, which will do this. And here's 3 different solutions that we could do for it. It suddenly becomes a lot more easy to have that conversation. Or if you're able to try and uncover some of those stories through research and play it back and say, you know, these are not random people we're designing for. These are everyday people. These are our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents. Like, think about the impact that we're having, because, you know, to be completely honest, we are all only able-bodied temporarily. Like, we will all experience a moment where we're going through some kind of unhappy path. So it's our responsibility, where possible, to try and make a case. I know that's quite a wishy-washy answer. I'm happy to go into more in detail with anybody later.
Yeah. And now that we know that you have a strong passion for regulated industries, I'm wondering, do you have any dream project in the most heavily regulated industry ever that you wish to be working on one day? Maybe somebody is listening?
I mean, I would love to work in female health, just because there's so much gender data gaps there. And I think there's so much more that can be done. And I think a lot of businesses, they kind of toe the line of they can't be a medical device because it means a lot more. So they can't make recommendations and things. But yeah, I would love to work in female health.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for being with us. Please give a round of applause to Emily Anderson.